Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford, spending about 50 minutes answering reporters' questions on an ambush that took place in Niger on October 4th that killed 4 U.S. Army Green Berets. He did fill in a lot of blanks, and I want to get into all of that. Joining me now by phone is retired Army Major and CBS News Radio military analyst Mike Lyons. Mike, it's good to have you on the line. So first, let's talk a little bit about the timeline. About an hour after the attack, we learned from Joseph Dunford, General Dunford, an hour after they made contact with the enemy is when the troops requested support. It then took another hour for responding French jets to arrive from that first contact. What do you make of that timeline? Is that surprising?
Well, what's surprising is we didn't have our own internal assets there. The Army in particular has helicopters, and I'm sure there's someplace on station there, and why they weren't ready to go. When you bring in the French Mirage jets, you got to go, cross over another country, talk to, different channels. You have to expect it's going to take a long time, and they're considered strategic assets. And so the question that the investigation will determine, as General Dunford said, is why did it take so long, and why did we didn't have assets from our own station, helicopters in particular, that could have done that same mission, internal organic assets that are assigned to that organization.
So to be clear, the French Mirage jets are fighter jets. General Dunford did say that there was a U.S. unmanned aerial drone that was deployed that would have been conducting reconnaissance and surveillance. But we also, one of the questions General Dunford said remains is whether and why the French Mirage jets didn't actually fire on any targets, right?
Yeah, and that's because, again, they're more strategic weapons. They're area fire operations, whereas helicopters have the capability to do the more tactical battle, to go after individual fighters, let's say, on the ground with those kinds of weapons. But the Mirage is just not the same. You've got to mark positions. You don't want to have them fire on friendly locations. And while they have GPSs and while all that stuff is on the ground, it clearly was a lot of chaos, which happens in the fog of war. So it's just not the right weapon system to be brought to the battlefield at that point in time.
They are still looking into what happened to Sergeant LaDavid Johnson and how he became separated from the rest of the group. Let me just go through the timeline that General Dunford laid out. On October 4th, the 3 soldiers that were killed in action were evacuated. The 3 soldiers that were killed in action, their bodies were removed. But it wasn't until October 6th that Sergeant LaDavid Johnson, that his body was recovered. That is a key question, how he got separated. How do they investigate that?
Well, they're going to talk to the Nigerian officials that were involved with recovering him. They'll look at the distance and time and space where his body was located and tried to figure out how he was separated from the rest of his squad. That's a pretty big deal from the military's perspective, and it could be anything from he was cut off by the enemy, he was in a different location he should have been in. He could have made a fatal mistake that was nothing that he could have anticipated. Again, this is the fog of war that happens. But it could have been something that he was unfamiliar with. But the investigation has got to determine how that happened, because once that missing person report went out there, then the primary mission of everybody on station was to find him. They basically shut down the mission in order to find and brought, you heard General Dunford say, national assets to bear there. There's nothing more important that the military finds in making sure that they recover and go after someone who's missing.
There are about 800 U.S. troops in Niger, according to General Dunford. After this ambush, do you believe the U.S. should be talking about ramping up military operations in Africa? And I should say that during this press conference, General Dunford said there is currently no discussion for a larger footprint or an increased operational tempo in this part of the world.
Right, and he's also mentioned that we've got about 6,000 troops in the continent of Africa in 53 different countries, and they've been there for 20 years. And for congressmen to say that they had no idea this was going on, that's pretty amazing from my perspective. And you've got AFRICOM, the commander there, on Twitter over the course of years saying what we're doing there. I actually just spoke to the SOCOM commander, the Special Operations commander, who gave a similar kind of presentation, that what they're doing is a classic Green Beret mission, that what we did in Vietnam and helped the military there, the 4,000 or so Nigerian military forces. We don't need a lot of large numbers. They don't participate in combat battles. They only go on these support and recon patrols, and they stay away from the combat. There's going to be things where things are going to go wrong, and in this particular situation, they just didn't anticipate that this would happen.
You heard that term, and you and I have discussed that in the past about mission creep. Do you see any evidence of that here? You talked about the mission, and it is to support local troops, according to the Department of Defense's strategy to combat ISIS and al-Qaeda affiliates there. Do you see evidence of mission creep?
No, I don't. I see evidence of mission sustainability and mission staying the same. I mean, if this was mission creep, we would start out with 200 soldiers, and then we go to 1,000 soldiers. And next thing you know, we've got 5,000 soldiers, and then the president's asking Congress for 10,000. That's mission creep. That's, doing something completely different. If we started to go on the offense, let's say, if we had to bring in, there's no tanks there. People are concerned about why weren't they in tanks? Well, that mission is not, it's not about tanks. They were overwhelmed by a larger numerical force that's there. The enemy doesn't have that kind of capability. So I don't see, unless you add more troops, change the mission, go on the offense, do certain things, there is no mission creep. I thought that press conference, the reporters did a great job of literally asking every conceivable question, from whether this is Benghazi or whether mission creep, all those things, and I think the general did a good job of answering every single one of those questions.
Okay, Mike Lyons, thank you so much. I'll just add the general also said that in this initial investigation, which will continue, they do believe that this was local tribal fighters affiliated with ISIS that attacked these U.S. Army Green Berets.